So please just.
The heck was that? They're gonna tell me a flash flood or a tornado's coming or something?
Looks like, from what I could see, yes.
You think we're on?
I think we're,
Yeah.
Can you hear us and see us? We think you can.
we think
So,
so.
Dave, let me see if I got
There
this
you
right.
go.
You think you can see that they hear us?
I see that they hear, but I
He
can't hear
actually
that they
can
see.
He's got a fancy screen there. So welcome back. We are happy to be here with you today, and just wanted to cover something just to get us all on the same page. I think based on, I usually try to look quickly at the comments that took place during the class just to see if there's anything that I need to go back over. And so let me clarify, and then we'll all be on the same page, and then we can start off like
Yes,
that.
yes,
So
they see us and hear us. Okay.
they can see us and hear us. So the class today was called "The Hardest Commandments That We Can Keep." So I wanted that title to be like that so that I could establish a few points. And the reason that I felt led to teach this class today, several things triangulated. I read a couple of interesting articles and books, and I'm building, bless you, I'm building on a class that I taught last week called Walking with God, and where I developed that according to the Bible, to walk with God is equated with walking according to His ways and walking in the commandments. So that made me think, which commandments? Because, there are a lot of people who would say, I walk according to the commandments. And then you have another group that says you can't keep the commandments. And so this led me to think of a couple of things. I jotted a few notes. I put in my notes early in the week that no one can keep all the commandments. And as I thought about this and prayed and studied, I said, no one has ever been able to keep all the commandments. Now, this is where some of the questions came in. So I thought, how do I make this point to the people who listen to me on Saturday morning? Well, I named some people that you would think did keep the commandments or had a better shot at it than Ross. Like Moses. You would say, well, Moses kept the commandments. He wrote the commandments from God's voice. So he probably kept all of them. But truth is, he didn't and he couldn't. Because some of the commandments, and this is the trick, it's not meaning to trick people, it's meaning to lead people into further thinking. Moses, there are commandments that he said, when you go into the land, you're going to do this, this, and this. Do this in the land. So the point being that if you're not in the land of Israel, there are some commandments which don't apply. And then I felt like I should develop that further and list a few other people. Hezekiah is a very, very righteous person. In fact, 2 Kings 18, verse 5 and 6 says that he's the most righteous, that there's none like him. And at the time when that was written, he clearly was. Hezekiah was a godly man. He led a great religious reform. And it even says that he kept the commandments. He deviated not to the right and left, but he couldn't keep them all. So which ones could he not keep? Well, there are commandments that are specific for the priest. There are commandments that are for women. There are commandments that a person, even a righteous person, can't keep. Now, I know some people are going, well, that's so obvious, Ross. But the reason I wanted to stress these points is because you will meet people and you're trying to explain your faith. And one of the things you say is, well, we follow the commandments here. We look, and then what's the most magical answer? You can't live by the commandments. You can't possibly, no one, and generally what they'll say in a Christian environment, a Christian culture, is only one has kept all the commandments. And so using my same thinking, I said this, there are commandments that even Jesus himself didn't keep and couldn't keep, and not because he wasn't righteous. No, I'm not making fun. I'm saying there are laws, again, that are for women. There are laws about childbirth. There are laws for the priest and so forth. So someone asked the question, which commandments didn't he keep? The ones that are obvious are the ones that didn't apply to him. Yes. Now, having said that, and then this is my intro for all of us to talk. This isn't the Ross Show. Having said that, ultimately, there are plenty of commandments that we can keep, that we should keep. In fact, some of these laws are the basis for a good, decent society. People who are good people, whether or not, I know you've heard that there are none good, but decent people who live in a society where they're functioning as a responsible adult, some of them keep with no religious dealings whatsoever. And then I wanted to challenge us as Bible-believing people with this question, and then we'll hit the dialogue. Are there commandments that we keep that our motives might not be correctly aligned with God's will? Mm-hmm. Are we doing these out of sheer obedience, it says it, and therefore I'm going to do it, or are we looking for ways to bless other people in the execution of the commandments? There it is. I hope that explains, and I'll watch for comments.
I think, to me, simply put, lately I've been asking myself more so, what about this concept, this Jewish concept about repairing or healing the world? Mm-hmm. And I ask myself, what am I doing in my life to repair the world, to heal the world, to whatever? And, I do find myself lacking a lot of times, but I think that, for me, puts it simply that, what are my motives in everything I'm doing?
Yeah,
you know? Am I part of the solution or am I part of the problem?
right. I think that all of us, by living according to the commandments, are doing at least part of our part in repairing the world. You know, the old expression, I like it. I don't know who said it. You can maybe Google and get an accurate quote attributed to the right person, but the idea is that I may not be able to fix the world, but I might be able to fix somebody's world. You know, and I think that begins when we start working on ourselves. You know, like if I look at myself, knowing my weaknesses, and I can begin to work on what it is that I need to do, then that's going to help us down the road, I think. So let me address one thing. Here's a question. And Dale Hurley says, on Yom Kippur, Jews recite saying, we sinned and not I sinned. It is a group keeping, not necessarily individual. Okay, I could say yes to that, but I can also say there are individual responsibilities too. So there's an individual accountability and a corporate accountability. Beautiful rabbinic story. 5 rabbis are sitting in a boat. One of them pulls out a drill and starts drilling a hole in the boat. And another rabbi said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I'm drilling a hole. And he goes, you're going to sink the boat. He said, no, don't worry, I'm just drilling under my seat. The idea is that you put a hole, big enough hole in the boat, you're all going down. So there is that corporate sense, but there are also many of the commandments that are individually directed. We should all be seeking to live our lives according to the commandments.
What I got in my mind on this whole subject is besides what is sin, what is sin? You know, that's I think is what we're underlyingly talking about. We're pleasing God, not pleasing God, and that goes along with your fellow man too. You want to do that. So, with having said that, so what's the best definition of what sin is? That's how I would start this off.
All right.
What's the best definition of
Do
sin?
you want to give us, what's your thoughts?
Mrs. Mark, I've heard all the, you know.
That's a good point. Keep going. I like it.
That's pretty much it. I just want to know what people in general, or what maybe what's the Torah say, what sin is. What is sin? Going against God, not doing what He said to do.
You know what I'm teaching
what about
next week, by the way, don't you?
Probably.
But that's okay. We can
Is
touch
it a
on it.
bad feeling? You know, when you sin, do you get a bad feeling? So
You ought to.
that's where I'm
Well,
starting.
if you
You
know,
ought
if
to.
you know, if you, for instance, my opinion,
Yeah.
if you know the law and the judgment and the rules, if you will, and you willfully violate that, in other words, you purposely violate that,
Again, I'm getting to where
then that clearly is outside the bounds. That, I mean, to me, that's outside the bounds.
So
Now,
so
if you don't know, and you
So
do
you'd have
something
to-
stupid
So
out
you'd have
of
to have
ignorance,
you'd have to have a measuring. You as an engineer, you have to have rules.
right.
You know, these are rules of engineering. Or
It doesn't mean you're any less wrong, it's just that you lack the knowledge to be right.
I got you.
Okay, so here's
You know, the
like,
bridge still falls though.
The bridge
here's,
still falls, but
here's an
there's an
opposing,
opportunity
here's
there
an
for God to
opposing thought.
say,
Yeah,
okay, you didn't know,
Gotcha.
my child,
All right.
let's have a talk. And somehow or other,
Yeah.
eventually, you start getting led down the track, finding out what's right.
I've done some reading. I mean, there's an example of the unintentional sin, and that was the scapegoat thing, and that was pretty much the sacrifice system there on unknown sins, some sins I didn't know that I had done.
sins of
Like when the-
omission.
when
Sins
the-
of omission.
When he
Either-
tore his robe
on
because
purpose or not
they
on
saw
purpose.
the laws of Moses, go, oh my God, we've been sinning all this time. They didn't know.
They didn't know.
But what did they do after they found out? They started obeying the law.
So, you know,
So disobedience?
That's
Could
what
be
I said,
sin.
willful discipline.
Sin.
In other words, I know what the law is, but I'm doing it my way.
Right.
So it's almost, you get the idea, some of these texts paint a picture that there's a way that you ought to go. There's call it a path. We're using, like a descriptor. And you've got this path, and it's clearly the way you ought to go, but you get off the path. And so if in life, if God has ordained a certain path that we should walk in, the good way, let's call it the good way, and we choose our own way, you're not going to achieve, you're not going to get where you're supposed to be going, at least not in the easy way. You might have to make it a little bit tougher of a trip. But
Kind of reminds me of that trip we took to South Carolina or North Carolina.
yeah,
Going through, I think we went to a cow field or something.
a couple of bad roads.
Maybe that's where the curses come from, is that's God's way of.
Correcting your path.
You're sitting there and all of a sudden things are going wrong, things are going bad, I'm not doing what I'm, not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and all this stuff, so you go like, what's wrong here? You're asking a question.
I'm
You're
reminded of the
trying to get
story. I'm reminded of the story. David and his sins, and that's usually used as an example. Did he, when he committed most of these sins, did he know? Did he know that he was sinning and did it on purpose? Or
The Christian Bible has a comment somewhere, I can't remember
Sure.
now, I should, but I can't, where it says, sin is the transgression of God's law. That's a definition, right? And then you have all these categories of, when you violate this, did you intend to do it? Did you know any better? Did you, so forth. And so you have different levels of how do we.
Did you teach others to sin?
Oh, yeah.
That's even, a worse place to be.
Well, there are a lot of questions that are coming up, and I just happened to look up. Stacy writes, do we sin when we do not bring a disobedient son for the stoning? This is an actual question I've been asked. So what people do is, Deuteronomy 21. It says, if you have, I'm paraphrasing, I could go to it, but I got 3 places marked already.
Bar fingers.
If you have a son who is disobedient, rebellious, you should bring him to the elders of the city in the city gate, and you'll say, this son of ours is a zolel v'soveh, a drunkard and a glutton. He won't hearken to the voice of his mother and his father, and they will take up stones and stone him to death. And then what's going to happen is the other bad kids in the neighborhood will go, you saw what happened to Billy.
Right.
All right, I'm going to behave. And you'll thereby take the bad out of the town, and it's ultimately going to correct itself. Well, so that brings up a very important question. People go, well, what?
Who are the elders?
Yeah, well,
Where are we going to bring them?
so the Jewish people looked at this. There's a very famous discussion about this because now, especially now, you just can't do that in St. Francisville, Now, what the rabbis did was they said, this is an uncomfortable question. And I would say the same thing. Because here on one hand we say, look, we have these divine laws and they're wonderful, but in a modern society, people would look at that and go, that is crazy, right? Now others would say, well, I don't know, you wouldn't have to do it much.
Or use those texts as why I don't want to believe in your God and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
It's
yeah.
almost, and I'm sorry if it comes across this way, but it almost sounds like Sharia law.
It
You know what I'm
does.
saying?
No,
Stone that woman.
Yeah.
Stone that bad
There,
child.
there are texts in the Hebrew Bible that make you go, wow.
Sounds like
It's seen, at least to our modern sensibilities and and so forth.
Kill them all.
So, how do you address these things? So, one of the things that the rabbis did, which I think is very wise, is they looked at, because these questions started becoming very questionable a long time ago, and so they said, okay, let's look at this case. First of all, and I'm not going in the order, this is me off the top of my head, one of the things they said,
Well, we could dialogue.
the rebellious kid, he doesn't listen to the voice of his mother and his father. Now notice, what they did with that is the rabbis looked at that and they go, okay, first of all, the parents have to be on the same page. and they have to speak in a single voice. If you got mama saying, leave little Billy alone, he's just a boy, he's just a kid,
Yeah.
remember you used
Yeah.
to not be that good, Dave, when you were a kid, and the dad's going, no, I'm gonna bring him to the
At that point, their parents ought to bring them to the gate. I'm just saying.
Well, but what they do is they then say, all right, so that has to be the case. And then they define the specifics of it. What does it mean to be, like the charge? It just says that he's a rebel and he won't listen to the voice of his mother and his father. Well, you might have a 5-year-old kid, a 10-year-old kid, especially when they get in teenage years, some
Yeah.
of them,
Right.
they're a little bit rebellious. So do you just drag them out there? Should we have done that? Well, I wouldn't be here today.
No.
I mean, I wouldn't.
either.
I don't think any of us
Seems
would.
like they make I think where you're going to, and I don't want to speak for you, but it seems like it was made real difficult to actually stone a child.
It was made very difficult.
Yeah.
And so corporal punishment,
Almost impossible.
even in cases in the biblical text where it was called for,
Right.
it was almost impossible. Now, but are there texts, we could say, are there texts which seem to lay that out as the appropriate response to certain crimes or sins? And the answer is yes. Even Sabbath breaking, there are things that can cause. Now, so my only answer for right now is we ought to think about this and think about it in a very, very deep way to think about something. Really look at it and say, okay, first of all, you brought up a question. What about the elders of my town? What if you brought, first of all, if you brought your kid to the elders of any town in the USA, right now they would go, no, we don't do that
They
here.
might
Thank
stone
ma'am."
you.
Yeah.
They might stone.
Yeah.
Again, there are laws that were done in the ancient world. They're in that society at that time. Now, a lot of people will look at these things and they will be critical of the Hebrew Bible, and they'll just say, it's crazy. It's just, but in a modern society, we have examples of extremist elements who, according to their biblical writings, call for certain things, honor killings or whatever, and they say, no, this is from God, this is the way we're going to do it, right, in some cultures. But I think what I try to think about when I claim to follow or seek to follow a Torah-based lifestyle, I'm looking at those ethical, monotheistic teachings. So when someone's charge is, Ross, you don't live according to all the commandments. By the way, this is why I taught this class.
Right.
You're right. We don't. No one ever has. But from the depths of this document, we can pull out some of the most deeply moving things, like Leviticus 19. Leviticus 19. Love your neighbor as yourself. If we strove for that, really, how much different would the world be?
And that's a good point. But also, I want to point out that and I agree with what you said this morning. You also said it can't be done. Keeping the commandments, it can't be done.
Not all
All
of
of them.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
I
yeah,
understand.
yeah.
But that's
Applicable.
important getting all
Okay.
those little words
Yeah.
in there. But
So,
I mean, the point is, nobody ever has, nobody ever will.
Right.
That's
because some of them don't apply to you.
That's
okay,
right.
so let's address the Christian problem here then, because I was raised hearing this all the time.
Sure, your original sin, man. You-
Nobody
born-
can keep the commandments, but they would say perfectly. And that was a requirement for salvation in Christianity. You had to either keep them perfectly if you erred in one little point. But nobody ever talked
that
about
was the
what
whole
those
point of
commandments
Christianity,
were.
that
They didn't read
Nobody
that section of
ever-
the Bible that's
Right.
where God said that He would forgive you.
That's right.
Well, no, nobody, I never in all my life of Christianity heard anybody teach these are the commandments we're talking about that you can't keep.
Yeah.
Nobody ever said that.
Well, that's primarily, I think, because people are rolling with questions about the same
Yeah.
thing. So the point being, I kind of wrapped it up with this, but I knew it would cause more discussion. But here's the idea: the things that we can do,
Yeah.
we ought to really try to. I mean, why would you not want to do? If God said this pleases me, why would you not want to do it? Look, a lot of people go, "What about sacrifices?" Well, first of all, right now, you couldn't do sacrifices if you wanted to because of certain biblical laws.
Right.
You know, there's some things you cannot do because there's no temple, there's no.
Not to mention some state laws too.
Right, right. But the idea would be, you know, because people could debate. They could say, well, I don't think God ever wanted sacrifices. I think he did. It says you got to read Ezekiel 40 through 4. Okay. But right now, here's the point. This is what I want to draw people to. There are things that we can do right now.
Sure.
There's some things that any decent human, believer or not, is doing already.
Sure.
And so you could say, no, you're doing some right now. There are some that we currently do, like we say, well, we keep the Sabbath. Well, do we really guard the Sabbath, or do we just take a day off from work? And is our motive, like Deuteronomy 5 says, so that your manservant and maidservant, and by the way, your ox and your donkey and all your animals can rest too. God cares for oxen, right? To answer that famous question by Paul, does God care for oxen? James Tabor taught a class on that one time ago. Does God care for oxen? And the answer to that is yes, he does. He includes them in those worthy of rest on God's holy day.
And, you know, of course, the sparrow idea, you know,
Yep.
you know, there's a sparrow. Yeah.
So, not to scare somebody that just turned in.
That's
A little over 3 or 4 years ago, I didn't have the date. I had not crossed over. I had not become a Hebrew.
Yeah.
Just cross over.
Yeah.
So I ate pork. I ate shellfish. I did all kinds of things.
Yeah.
You're not allergic to it or nothing.
Yeah. I mean, I ate anything that walked, moved, or crawled except people,
Yeah.
and thought nothing of it. So, as I began to learn, I was like, and nobody forced me. I'm like, shouldn't be eating pork. Did that happen immediately? No. There was a period of time, and they're thinking about that, and eventually, yes, the answer was pork goes away. And then living where we do, of course, where I have my whole life and around the sea,
Yeah.
those things that you can't eat out of the sea. Well, I've been eating them since
Yeah.
as soon as I got off formula and milk.
Right.
So those eventually went away. So as you get into it, are you following it as you're learning? Nobody's born doing all the commandments and all the judgments and everything. You have to learn and you have to try. You have to try. It takes work. It's not just free.
Right.
Nothing that my freshman economics teacher in college, he had something called the Tinstoffel principle. There's no such thing as a free lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, everything you get in this life, you have to work for it. And so,
It takes effort to walk in God's
are we
ways.
all, so righteous that we can say, well, yes, I always absolutely keep the Sabbath. Well, I don't. I fail.
Yeah.
Well,
But I'm trying to get better at it.
and just to
Work.
capture some of these comments that go along with what we're saying, one of the things that Anita said, even Jesus said, you want to enter life, keep the commandments. People on this journey begin noticing things like that. Our churches might tell us you can't keep them. We read that you can and that you should.
And I've been told that you shouldn't even try.
Don't try.
Don't try.
You've fallen
You can't
from
do it.
grace. And then we get to the place, I think some of us get to the place where we think, I keep them all. So my point today was to say, no, you don't. You don't keep them all. No one can keep them all because they don't all apply to us because of our gender, because of our station in life. I'm not a king. Even if I want to be a king, I'm not a king, so I don't really.
But sometimes we can't, we don't do a really good job of keeping the applicable ones.
Exactly. So my
And
point.
those take work.
Vicky says, so the heart does become more important. Mind and every. Do I want to do it? Do I try? If I fail, do I have an out? Recognize, return, and His overwhelming mercy. That's beautiful. So let's say I try to do something and I fail. Does it mean it's the end of the road? No, because the beauty of the Hebrew Bible is that God desires us to return. He says, the soul that sins will die. That sounds like the wages of sin is death. What's sin? We'll talk about it. But the idea is that But God says, but return to me,
And I will turn.
and I'll turn to you.
Ross-
He wants us to try to keep his
You know
ways.
what that sounds like to me, and this is just my opinion, but Dave asked a question about David. When he sinned, did he know ahead of time? And I think that's a problem
I think he.
right
think
here.
he did.
Deuteronomy
I think
28
he definitely
1.
knew after that prophet.
Listen
came
to the voice of Jehovah.
Yeah.
When we drift, when we drift away, we can fall into that place where our ears can't hear the voice of God anymore. And I think that's where David was. I think David drifted.
Yeah, but
Let me-
he
let me-
intentionally deviated. When
Well,
you
yeah,
send a man to a
but-
place where you hope that he gets killed,
Yes,
But
but
hang
why
on,
did he
let's
do
back it up. Let's back
Why
it
did he
up. Back
do
it,
it?
back it, back it up. Genesis 4. All right, this goes into what I'm going to do next week, but I want to touch on this. In Genesis 4, the only rule was, remember eat from, you can't eat from this one, but remember, all right, so this unloads, this launches what becomes this process that we now live with, life outside of Eden. Now, at this point, in chapter 4, verse 6, Jehovah tells Cain, and Jehovah said unto Cain, why are you upset? And why is your face fallen? If you do well, shall you be not accepted? And if you don't do well, sin crouches at the door, and to you shall be his desire, but you can rule over him. Now, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to unpack this next week. But Dave and I have had a lot of conversations in the
Paul,
past 12 years
Paul,
about
just
it.
real quick.
Yeah.
Because my mind was thinking, it's like, and that's a terrible thing.
All right.
Anyway, so is that a commandment that we should walk around with a smile on our face? I mean,
A smile?
that's a commandment.
No,
Jehovah said smile.
not if it's not
Don't
if it's
walk
not
around not
sincere.
Well,
No, it was
the
more
question
than
would
that.
be, does that mean smile?
So
But-
that's 615 right there.
But he's,
Just added to it.
But he's upset. God sees he's upset, and the question is, what's wrong? Don't you understand that if you do well, it'll go well? And but this idea that sin is crouching at the door. Now, it is this language. How literally do we take this? So now go to David. David doesn't go out to war. He looks out of his palace window. This is me giving the story ad lib.
Sure. You see
He
it in your
looks
mind.
out and he sees a beautiful woman bathing on her roof. And he has someone go get her and bring her to him. He sleeps with her, gets her pregnant. This is just one bad
It just
thing
keep
after
rolling
another.
and rolling, yeah.
When we make a mistake, Johnny Powell told me one time his dad was a big preacher, and his dad said, it's hard for a righteous person to sin. And I've always thought about that. I don't think that we
Those little
can,
bitty
I don't
things,
think we can say, like if you're looking at a beautiful woman or a handsome man and you're married and you say, I could have that. I don't think for 1 minute that you just didn't know any better.
Right.
I think you consciously chose to do the wrong thing. Now, what we see in the story of David is that he pays a terrible price.
It escalated.
But it doesn't save the man who was married to Bathsheba. He still dies. The consequences of sin don't always bring physical death, but
And the
they
child's still
often,
born.
and the child, but they often bring horrendous situations. Look, even in our day, we may not kill an adulterer or an adulteress, and I'm thankful that we don't. But what we see are the repercussions of that in our
destruction.
daily life. Look, and I know there are people who've lost, their families have been separated. I know many people, and it's sometimes because of unfaithfulness. Look, it's a bad thing. So even if someone doesn't believe in God, I've had people come to me for advice, and they're thinking about separating, and they say, "Look, I don't really believe the Bible, but I want to talk to you." But I want people to know that a family unit, some of these laws are meant to protect a family unit, right? And we oftentimes create more problems for ourselves when we disobey God's commands. So there's a lot to unpack in these stories, but even if we keep the commandment, like I think Richard mentioned the letter of the law, if you will, even if we read and we say, look, I wear fringes and they have a cord of blue and I can tick all the boxes, am I doing something? Am I fulfilling a commandment but not yet fully realizing or having the right motivation?
Yeah, one of our YouTube viewers brought up something, and I've heard it before, and I'm not sure if it's actually in the Torah. Love covers the multitude of sin. I think everybody's kind of heard that saying.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the love of money. The love of God perhaps may cover sin. Yeah, but I don't know if it covers the right word.
Maybe his love covers them all.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah, so I mean,
We're not excused.
No.
We're not excused to go about living our life the way we choose and just say, "Well, God's love, He'll forgive me." Well, that's true, but
perfect love will keep you from sinning. I think.
Doesn't it say something about that in the scripture, though, that, he can forgive you, just like he did David, but there are consequences to your behavior that are gonna happen. You might get forgiveness, but you have to live with you have to live with your actions.
so there are a couple of things that this brings up. First of all, the Hebrew Bible is very consistent on personal accountability. And so, for instance, if there are rules about a thief, so if someone steals something from someone else, they have to make restitution. Now, so the example would be is if this book belongs to Sherry and she's preoccupied looking at playing Angry Birds or whatever she's doing, and I take her book and I steal it, and then I feel bad about it, and I go home tonight and I say, "Dear Lord, forgive me of my sins. Forgive me for taking Sherry's book, and then I'm not going to do it again. Look, and then I get up and I say, boy, I do like this book, though. See, I haven't really made restitution. But if I go back to her the next day and I say, Sherry, I am so sorry that I took this book. It was yours and I stole it. And look, I feel so badly that I'm going to also give you this nice book in addition.
Oh, wow.
See, because
Wait, I like that.
yeah, it is nice. So I'm not giving you either one of these, by the way, but I'll make a copy of it.
I can borrow it.
But think about it. So we in our society, a lot of times, our criminal justice system seeks to punish for wrongdoing, but even in the modern day in which we live, we can be critical of the way that was done in the ancient world, but how often do we seek restitution be made? Now, some laws do.
Sure.
But if someone is busted for stealing something, how well do we do in our application of good, solid, just principles? So that's the point, is that sin has a consequence, and we also need to think about personal responsibility, and we'll get into all those things. So.
Some people think
Ronnie-
time heals.
Ronnie Shelton has a good question. Is keeping the commandments specifically for you, the ones you can keep, imply that God expects perfection?
That's a great question. In Hebrew, when we see the English perfection, generally there are two words, one word primarily, and that word is tamim, to be complete, to be whole. So if you're not perfect, you're not whole. Now, you could think about a lot of things that go into that. If you're not living your life according to God's ways, my view, because I'm a preacher, I would say we're not a whole person. You can't be whole without God's intervention and direction in your
And
life.
you know what
And by the
whole
way-
means to me? Healthy.
Yeah,
Healthy in mind,
lo-
soul, body.
yeah,
I love the way that wordplay is.
Yeah.
Holy.
yeah, whole and
That's
whole,
the same.
WHOL
One is
versus,
whole. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just mind blowing.
Oh, yeah, a hole is space with nothing in it.
Well, that's a different age.
yeah. So if you think about it, you've got all these different ideas about living life a certain way. Now, Ronnie says, does God imply or expect perfection? God does lay out his plan. Now think about it. and this also applies to the question, the comment earlier. If he says he created us, and he created us to be upright and whole, W-H-O-L-E, and he expects, say, Abraham, walk before me, King James, and be thou perfect. Noah walked with God and he was a just man and perfect. He's whole, he's complete. When we read the story of Noah, this is why I did last week's class before this one, it says, Noah, we don't ever get him talking. All we hear is where Noah is saying, God tells Noah to do something, and all we get is, and Noah did as commanded, and Noah did as commanded. He was considered upright, just in his generation. So God does expect us, I believe, to follow the way that he ordained, and he wants us all to live that way. He doesn't want anyone to die. But he says, turn and live. So what does that mean? In the New Testament even, when Jesus meets someone and they're sinning or whatever, and think of the woman being stoned. Beautiful story. Yep. They pick up stones and we caught this girl. She was in the very act, and they have their arms reared back, and Jesus said, okay, he who without sin casts the first stone. Now, I know there are critics who go, well, there's nothing in the Bible that says you have to be sinless to throw a rock at somebody. The question remains, though, is that a good point? Mm-hmm. It's a dadgum good point. Mm-hmm. Now, what this does is, by every right, she, according to the text, but his point is to say, look, none of us are where we need to be. And they all threw down their rocks and walked away because evidently, at least according to the story, it made an impact on them. I think if we truly sought justice in these matters, there is a standard whereby we should live. And some of these violations, according to the standard, call for death. But God is merciful and gracious and long-suffering. Look, there were times in the wilderness journey where the children of Israel committed grave offenses, and Jehovah said, I'm going to wipe them out, Dave, and start over, and you're going to be the new guy. Yep. They had every right, but you know what happens? You got somebody interceding. Think about Sodom and Gomorrah.
And they ended up still having to walk through the desert.
Yeah, the consequences, right?
Eventually, I think half of them died from snake bite there.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things
Mount
happen.
Nebo.
I mean, golly, there's so many roads there's so many forks in the road on this conversation we can go down. It's almost hard to keep up with. I don't know how you.
It is.
What's going through your mind when you decide to have this talk? It's like.
Well, like Vicky just said, this is a good point. Yeah. It's one of those difficult things, Ross. It's hard to go back and admit you stole the book. It really is. Yeah, sure. Now, there's another option.
Nobody ever knows.
There's another option, like somebody might say, Ross, you're stretching it, but what if, let's say I stole the book. By the way, Vicky gave me a book. Thank you, Vicky. I just want to get it out there. I didn't steal it. She gave it to me. But let's say I did take the book, and I wanted to make restitution, but I was ashamed or whatever.
Right.
This is a question.
Sure.
You're all rabbis, let's play like.
Okay.
What if I took the book that I stole, and I did feel remorse,
Right.
and I decided that I was going to follow the law, and I was going to give that book and another book to make restitution plus the 100% that I owe for stealing, and I just put them on Sherry's doorstep, and I beat on the door, and I run so she can't see, and she'll go, I don't know who gave this back, but whoever took it must have gave it back. Mm-hmm. Is that a fulfillment of did I do right?
Partially.
What else should I do?
For the horse, you should have asked for forgiveness.
Should I? That's a good question.
Would that have required, look like humility on your part? Like you were lacking humility? It's like pride would keep you from...
Or fear. Let's say I stole Dave's, and I know Dave can beat me up. You know, maybe you wouldn't beat me up, but Dave might get mad.
Over you with his car or something. You know? I'm just saying.
No, but what if part of our lesson in life is to admit that we've made a mistake?
Right.
You know, you're
Standing
kind of
tall.
throwing yourself on the mercy of the
yeah.
offended. Now,
And by the way, I see the light flickering real quick, so if
We might lose it,
If we
yeah.
go away, we're just gonna go away.
So,
Yeah,
on
there's some storm
Power
coming.
Parents have some, you know, all parents have a guiding factor they have to do. So I personally recall, like, I was 4 or 5 years old, we were in some store, little store. This is way long ago, I'm talking like almost 60 years. And so there was something that attracted this little boy's eye, and he snatched it, you know, and took it out of the store with him, get in the car, and Mom says, "Where did you get that?"
Right.
Got it in there. You picked that up and brought it out here? Yeah. And then marched me back in there and made me return it to the store owner and
Yeah.
apologize.
oh yeah,
And then get the lecture in the car.
it's a very important lesson, though.
Well, you know, that little memory right there stayed with me my whole life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a parent can make not always, but a parent can make a huge difference in how somebody follows God's instructions.
People that know me know that my oldest son is a doctor, very studious his whole life. I mean, he didn't get this from me. Well, I don't know. I like to study.
I've heard him ask questions in dialogue that stumped you.
Yeah, he's a
Say,
thinker.
Dad.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna play like I don't see Ty.
Yeah,
But when Ty was even when he was young, like he was one of those kids that just read all the time, and I knew one day that he didn't read his book. You know, you know, a little kid, he's probably 5 or 6. He's supposed to read a certain number of pages, and I said, "Hey, where are you going?" He said, "I'm going outside." I said, "Did you read yet? Did you do your homework?" "Yes, sir." I said, "Come here for a minute." And I remember setting him on my lap, and I held that book, and I said, and I'm looking at it. I'm flipping through it, kind of quickly reading it. You know, it's an easy book, it's big words, and Billy and somebody are raking leaves. And I said, "Did you really read this book? Because I didn't see how you had time." And he was insistent that he had. And I said, "Well, what's the story about?" And he's looking at the picture like I'm looking at the picture on the cover. And he makes a stab at it, and he's wrong. I knew he didn't read it. And I said, "What time of year is it?" Well, it was the fall, the raking leaves, right? And I said, "What season is it? Is it the spring?" "Mm-hmm." And so I just lead him down the path for a few. I'm not saying this is good parenting. I'm just saying it was.
You're
So
having fun.
it led me, after a few of these questions, I said, "You didn't read this book because here's what it's about. Now go read the book." So when he was probably had just turned 30, I asked him, "Do you remember that?" He said, "I was just telling somebody about that the other day." So there are times as parents and friends and teachers that we can give important moral and ethical lessons that help us to know the importance of telling the truth or living a holy
Integrity,
life,
honesty, and
integrity,
integrity,
honesty, yeah.
Standing up for being tall and taking responsibility for your actions. That goes back to the Jewish, taking responsibility for your actions.
Yeah, yeah, it's very important, and I think that what I really want to do is I guess as I get older and more mature, hopefully, and more mature in the faith, I'm not as fond, or let's just say I despise arrogance among religious folks. So I try to avoid it. If anybody sees me acting that way, let me know, because I hate it. But I see this sometimes, and there's no better way to call it than just call it a religious spirit, where people act like, "Oh, I'm so holy, and I live my life right, and I eat the right foods, and I do this, and I do that." The question is, are we missing a motive when we blow a trumpet before us? And I think that we can be, and I think it's important that we not do that, you know?
Ross,
Yeah.
Miriam has a good
Yeah,
question.
that's a good point.
Many don't have parents like that with Bible understanding. How can they know what's right?
I think that there are things that all humans know, are just they know the difference in right and wrong. I believe that. I really do. And I'll give you an example. The thing that I just described with my son had nothing to do with a Bible story. It was an example of telling the truth. Most decent societies, most cultures respect family and relationships and truth and integrity. And so there's a lot of good in the world apart from religion. I know some don't believe that, but I do.
Well, say, for example, a child is raised in a household where there's racism and bigotry and
Yeah.
it's common to steal to
Yeah.
justify the means justify the end kind of
Yeah.
philosophy. How will that child know unless, I mean, if
Now
if
you're getting there.
Israel is, to be a light to the nations,
Uh-huh.
could that be the way that child knows by seeing?
And not just Israel.
Yeah,
You know whether you're
Yeah.
Israel or not. I mean, in other words, those who know the right, when they do the right, sometimes we may be the only example that others have. You're right. There are tragic situations where a child is brought into the world and his or her parents don't model a good moral
Right.
and ethical behavior. They don't have the values that we love and hold dear. We have opportunities to help others around us in that regard. So I think that, yes, the faith is supposed to be a family thing, but it can spread. I asked my wife the other day, there was a little boy that was on one of our kids' baseball teams years ago, and this kid was really, he was brought up in a bad home. I mean, like a not godly home, it was bad. And we kind of took this kid on as a project. Dave, you told me about a couple of boys that you dealt with in scouting. Look, we have opportunities in life to be a light to those around us, and I think we ought to take advantage of those situations, really.
Also, reality and the starkness of things. Be prepared for failures as well as successes.
Yes.
You can't change everything in the world,
Yes.
Yeah,
but you can if you only have one success out of 10. That's one person that's not going to be taking up space in a jail cell, probably.
Hopefully.
yeah, and I know that's the kind of questions our daughter-in-law has, being a high school teacher.
Yeah.
The impact she can have, and she does care deeply about her students.
Ronnie
Is that-
asked a question here. It says, would this be a rabbinic concept? I love this. Next week's class is gonna be fun too.
Yeah.
Would this be a rabbinic concept, and is God always ready to say, okay, take another book, give to someone, give to anyone, anywhere, and this restores your taking the first book? I can't see this as a substitute for the offense of stealing by just giving a book or whatever the thing is. Biblically, it is biblical. It's not rabbinic. If I steal a sheep, and we're going to get into this, restitution. If I steal a sheep, I have to give the sheep back, and I give additional sheep.
That's right.
Now, there's a difference if I steal your sheep, Dave, one sheep, I steal your sheep, and it's found in my possession. There's a different punishment for it. We'll talk about that next week. But if I come to you and I was like, look, man, I stole your sheep, I went home with it, and I was about to kill it and eat it, and I felt badly, here's the sheep, and here's the penalty for me taking your first sheep. You might be like, all right, well, cool. Don't do it again. Yep, all right, thanks, Dave.
Unless you can't give it back, like when the prophet was talking to David.
Right.
Yeah, now there's some things you can't undo.
Yeah, or I
the
die and go away, and you
consequences.
can't. How can you possibly bring my sheep back to me at this point? So there's a
Even-
lot of
And there's
Sheep
still
even ate at the table.
consequences. Yeah.
Okay, and this kind of leads into another YouTube
Okay?
thing. A poor man may steal to feed his family, requires sound judgment. And that's all it was said. But I think the point is, stealing is wrong. It's bad. But what if a man's trying to feed his family? I mean, that's happened in the world. I mean, he gets caught with stealing a chicken or something. Whatever.
Right.
Grocery store.
So the question is it ever okay
Is it ever okay?
to violate the commandment? And my answer is no, it's not.
Okay.
Now, there's another side of the law. We know that there are some people who are so poor and depraved, and they're so poor, they're so broke, they can't afford to eat maybe. And so you go, well, then it's okay for them to steal. No, there
shouldn't
is,
have to steal from
there's a mechanism in place in the law that will take care of that hunger. What is it? Think of some laws with me.
The corner of
You
the
leave the
fields.
corners of your field.
Yeah.
When you shake the olives out of your tree, you don't shake them and you go, wait a minute, I still see some up there, I'm going to get the rest of them. You leave it. You shake it, you get and you leave. You leave the corners. You take care of the poor. Deuteronomy 15 is gorgeous. I mean, it's beautiful.
So practically speaking, how that would apply to us is that we need to have food banks. We need to have whatever that will help those people
Yeah.
who cannot afford
Well,
to.
And
to
if
feed
we
themselves.
don't, we could be leading
And
people.
you're just as guilty as the person that
Who
stole the
steals.
chicken.
Yeah.
If we think about this, Deuteronomy 15
There's a
says,
drum to do it.
that
Maybe
there-
worse.
Deuteronomy 15 says you won't have any poor. If you keep the commandments, you won't have any poor among you.
This is all we will.
And then right below it, a few verses later, it says there'll always
There'll
be
always
poor
be
among
with
you.
you.
You know why? Could it be that God knows we're not going to live right?
Right.
I mean, when people start debating, well, how big's a corner? I mean, how much do I leave?
Or even a better one. you know,
Well-
I don't own a
Wait.
field, but the Torah says that I need to leave the corners of my field, so I need to go buy a field. I mean.
Yeah.
that's
Well,
what that
or
says.
I don't have I don't have a field, so I don't have a corner, so I don't
Yeah.
need to do
But
anything.
Yeah,
should
that's
you go-
wrong too,
should
because
you
the
go have to buy
application
one?
would be.
No, they just say, I
Would
don't have
be
one,
the-
so I don't have to do
You
anything.
wanna
No.
keep the commandments, you gotta go buy a field.
But he doesn't have to keep a command if he doesn't have a field.
That's
See where
where
this
the
is going?
intent comes
You see where
in.
this is
That's
The
where
intent is
comes
that
in.
you
Take care
do
of the
something,
poor.
do a
Yeah.
portion of whatever it is
I
you
think
do
so.
to take care of your
Yeah.
brothers and sisters.
Wow.
And that's
You need
kind
to
of where
put that
you,
food bank box.
that's kind of, yeah, that's kind of.
There's another way to do that, by the way. You can, just like with United Israel, you can go to the food bank and you can give them money.
Okay.
Right.
So there are ways that we can apply these things in a principle.
Yeah.
You know,
Exactly.
and I think I didn't want to come across like I'm preaching
Right.
and saying, listen to me, the holy teacher, tell you all this good stuff. What I was really saying is, have we lost our way in a bit? Have we strained at a gnat and swallowed a camel? Have we focused on the details that we should keep, but ignored the weightier matters of the law, if you will, the Torah? What is it that it's really getting at? What if the true intent is that we have a society where we proclaim liberty to all the inhabitants thereof, that no one is subjugated to another, that everyone, I mean,
So
well,
there was a rabbi once that said, it is better to be kind than to be right. And I don't think that was just about having a debate and a conversation of being right over somebody else. Kindness is more than that.
yeah.
It's more than just, you can profess to be right, but how right are you if you're not kind?
You can be
And
right.
you'll never be completely right. There's always some little nook or cranny. And so if you lord it over somebody else, I'm righteous and you're not, Sister Bertha better than you, whatever.
Yeah.
Sister Brett,
As long as you're
you
kind.
that's a new
As
one.
long as you're kind, though.
But if you're kind, you don't do that.
Right.
So
do
you
it
try
out
to
of
help, you
kindness.
try to help others, knowing that you're not perfect. They're not perfect either, and
Yeah.
we all need a little help.
Well, Ross, on that point, that you're holy. You saying I'm not holy. I think according to the proper definition, you're a holy man in that you have volunteered to set apart yourself, your time, your studies, for the purpose of studying the way, teaching the way,
We're all
the way.
in a way, we're all supposed to be holy.
Yeah.
But we can all use that little nudge that says, are we really doing what we need to do? Could we do more? It's to your point, John, you can be right and not do right. I mean, like I can say, well, I did that. That's what it called for. I did the right thing.
I'm good to go.
But there's another side to that. Are our motives, are we really pure
I'm
in
good,
our...
but is Dave good? Did I stop and help him a second?
Yeah.
Or the guy down in the corner, or
Oh.
whoever?
I would.
Yeah, you would.
So we have
Liar,
to.
liar, pants on fire.
helping.
I could tell.
So Vicky says we need practical applications, and I think
Yes.
that's a good point.
Yeah, it is.
Look, an organization that's small like United Israel right now, and it is fairly small, it would be nice if we had such that we had excess and we could do, and we're looking, but at the same time, individuals can find ways individually. Yes, there is a corporate thought process. What do we support? How do we actively engage in community? Face it, our community with United Israel is all over the world.
Yeah, it's mostly online.
So we're encouraging people, find ways to help in your local community that you know about. You know, start with family, start with immediate circles, and then work your way out. We all know those stories where a church or a synagogue is sending aid to Zimbabwe, and right in their own neighborhood, there are people that are barely able to pay their light bill. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not all money. You understand what I'm saying? But there are things we can do. Try to fix this week. Try to fix somebody's world in some way. Look for ways.
One of the things I impressed my kids on was the discussion of money. And money, to some people, means different things. In my life, what I impressed them with is money is an exchange. I get money for what I give of my life.
Yeah.
So that money it represents a part of my life that I gave up to be able to go do something with.
Right.
So, wahoo!
Y'all hear that lightning?
So if you give money, you're not
Careful
really
what you
just
say,
giving.
bro.
You're not just giving money. You're giving part of your life,
Yeah.
and that's what's important.
Yeah.
Just in case some
a
of
part
you.
of you.
A part of you,
yeah.
because you gave up to get that. Now you're going to give it to somebody else. That's pretty noble.
It's like Jacob says. He goes, "If you'll be my God and you'll take care of me, then everything that comes to me, I'm going to give a tenth to you." And I always tell people, think about that. People can say, "Oh, I don't believe the tithe. You're supposed to give your tithe to a Levite," and we're not saying you need to take 10% of all your money and send it to United Israel or anything. But what if we did take a 10% of everything that we have, and we said, I'm going to look for ways to give that to God or towards holy things. That's a way to
Yeah.
think
And it
about
doesn't have to be just money, because
Exactly.
money is time. So if you give your time, you can satisfy that as well. Because if you don't have the money, if everything you've got goes to the maintenance of your family,
Yeah.
Yeah,
and you got nothing left, maybe you got time to give,
yeah, that's right.
to go do something, to work at a food bank, to work
Yeah.
at a soup kitchen,
Yeah.
to help out some
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, we all have, I really believe this, I all think we have certain gifts and talents that we can use to advance God's kingdom, and it can be anything. I have friends on Facebook that I see who are doing some good things, and they're helping other people, and I mean not necessarily things they post, look what I did. I'm saying other
Yeah.
people have said, thank you for taking the time to send me that nice note or whatever. So anyway,
By the way, Russ, I see animals lining up at the door.
it's pretty,
That's what I'm
it's pretty
saying.
crazy.
I'm gonna get out there and start
Oh,
building
it's
an ark.
storming.
Get here now.
Yeah, this is it's a real night. We're
Pretty
all
ready.
about ready to take a nap.
That's about a 10+ inch an hour rain. I say
It's heavy.
but
It is.
I don't know how
It's
long.
really heavy.
I'm watching it on my.
So everything
phone,
around here is
it's like-
saturated because we've had a lot of water already, and so this is
We
just
fixed to get a little
gonna.
break. We fixed to get a
Yeah,
little break.
yeah, it's about time.
Yeah.
Someday we'll get that pipeline where we can share water with our neighbors.
It just goes through the earth.
Yeah, right.
Look as you read the text, as you read the text of the Bible, we really ought to think about how can I apply this to my own life? Let me give you an
Yes.
example. Look at Exodus 23. These are some of those tough commandments and I think people look at them and they always go real far with them. Like, well, what about this? Well, just work with me here. 23 verse 3. Exodus 23:3. If you meet your enemy's ox or his ass going astray, you shall surely bring it back to him again. Now just think about that. This isn't, let's say we all are an agrarian culture and we all have oxen, and Dave is my worst enemy, and I see his ox going off, and I know it's his ox. We know each other. I hate him, but I know his ox. I'm commanded, you hear me? I'm commanded to go get that ox, guide it all the way back to Dave's house and go, hey Dave, here's your ox. Doesn't say I have to invite him over for cheesecake. Doesn't say I have to be, that's what it says.
It doesn't say you have to let my ox run wild until it does fall in a ditch. You can go, you're supposed to go get it before it falls in a ditch, right?
Now,
Yeah.
yes, and now let me add this. Let's say Dave and I are opponents, that we're enemies, if you will, and he hates me, and I bring his ox back. Even if I don't invite him for cheesecake, I bet you that evening he'll say, you know, I don't like the guy, but he did bring my ox back.
Or if I see
And
your
look,
ox, I'll be more inclined to.
It's starting to bring us together.
That's right.
See, what if the
That's right.
Torah is giving us these extreme points to make us see that it's bringing us together? The Bible says that people, opponents of the Bible, say it promotes slavery. Does it really? Or does it say if you have a servant, you could be an employer that have people work for you, and it starts lining out rules. Now, you're not supposed to strike that person. You're not. What if eventually and you have to let them rest one day a week, and it's starting to maybe soften you, and
Maybe they'll get a smile on their face and they won't see them, won't be crouching at
That's
the
right.
door. As much.
That's right. Look at this.
Yeah.
It keeps going. Verse 4. If you see the ass of him that hates you lying under its burden, and wouldst forbear to unload it, you shall surely unload it with him. So this is a little bit different. Now, I got the ox with a burden on it, and Dave's out there struggling to get his ox up, and I'm watching him on my front porch smoking a cigar and eating bonbons. Should I do that, or should I go, hang on, man, you're going to hurt your back. I'm coming to help you.
That's right.
That's what the Torah says. Now, this isn't a friend. This is your enemy.
Or the enemy sees that poor ox or ass, whichever it was, and says, hold on, I see you're going to break your back. I'm going to come, even though I don't like this, your owner, I'm going to come help you.
Yeah, that's right. Either way, but you're forced to help.
Yeah.
If you see, the biblical text challenges us things that aren't intuitive in our nature. It really does challenge us. When it says you shall love, look at Leviticus 19. This is another really good one, and most people don't quote this correctly. This is one of the most well-known verses, and it's the least known verse. Get ready. Leviticus 19:18. Here's the way people quote it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You know they don't get the whole verse in? Listen to this.
We're doing so.
You shall not avenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You can't bear a grudge, and you can't seek vengeance. You have to love your neighbor as yourself. There's a little bit more to it than just go, oh yeah, I love him just like me, Now look down at verse 34. Look at 33, 1933. And if a stranger sojourns with you in the land, you shall not wrong him. But the stranger that dwells with you shall be to you as one born among you, and you shall love him as yourself, because you were strangers in the land of Egypt. So if someone would have read verse 18 and said, and you go, hey, there's a guy over there, he's from, I don't know, Egypt.
And just
You're like, well,
that,
he's not my neighbor. I just deal with these people in Judea. I mean, he's my neighbor. But then God said, wait a minute, this isn't an ethnic thing. This isn't, it says really love your neighbor. Excuse me. Love your neighbor. If your neighbor is from another country or whatever, you still treat him, don't do him wrong. Now, what's the problem here? He says, you ought to know. I tell people this all the time. I have 4 boys. I have 2 girls too, but the boys are the ones that give you the problems with this thing. Well, maybe girls too, I don't know. My girls got along. But the boys, the oldest one would beat the next one down. Like from time to time, he'd give him a whooping. And you'd say, don't do that. That's not right. You wouldn't want somebody to do that to you. So then number 2 child whips number 3. And you say, don't do that. You remember how it feels? You used to get, and you didn't like it, so don't do it to other people. They do it anyway. And it just keeps rolling.
Sure.
If at any point somebody would say, I'm not going to do that because I remember what it was like, it breaks the chain. It breaks the chain. What if God's ways break the chain? And that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to break the bondages, literal bondages of slavery and portum. Is portum a word? Being poor. If we help those that are poor to get on their feet,
Yeah.
Pretty good word there. I like that.
pretty
I'm gonna
good
write that
word.
one down.
Portum.
Amen, everyone.
I can't think of it.
Economically depressed.
Financially
Yeah.
embarrassed.
Financially challenged.
So, Tori, I don't know where it's at, about heaping coals.
Yep.
By doing good, you heap coals. And I've always thought that's exactly
I
what
like
that
that
meant. Because it burns, it sears into their consciousness that, maybe we'll get this right. In other words, I'm not putting it right.
I get it.
When you do something good for your enemy, and you do that, it causes them to, I'm sure they're going to get angry because they don't want that because
Yeah.
they're thankful. But it ultimately leads to a point where there's no longer any sin there.
Maybe.
Ronnie,
it
Ronnie
helped.
had a
It
good
couldn't hurt.
statement.
It couldn't hurt. It definitely
Addressed to
couldn't
you.
hurt.
Coin a Jewish phrase.
I mean, I
Ross,
don't know how
what
many-
you just said
I
is
mean, I don't know how
critical.
many of y'all out
This
there
giving
ever,
ox or
help your
whatever
enemies.
it is will
That's
help
happened.
others soften their hearts.
Definitely.
Please, God, let us give in such a way as to help soften all our hearts. This one meant a lot to me.
Where's
And that's what kept coming to me over and over about hearing the voice of God, about softening my heart. And I think King David cried out after his
No
sins.
doubt.
Creating me a clean heart, renew a right spirit within me, and to help our intentions be acceptable in your sight. That whole softening of the heart, so I can hear your voice.
Yeah.
And the softening of the heart, to me, means you're going to be able to love.
Yeah.
Hard-hearted people they don't have love.
It's incumbent on all of us to look for ways. Let me tell you this, I've learned in life, all of you have learned this, I think. I would rather have a friend than an enemy.
Right.
I want to keep my friends, and I wish that all my enemies were my friends. I don't think that I go out of my way to make enemies.
Yeah.
We typically don't, most of us.
Yeah.
Something's
but-
wrong if you do.
But our actions sometimes, if we don't approach relationships in love and understanding, we can either purposefully or inadvertently create an enemy that we didn't have before.
It's a talent.
Yeah.
People work at it, I think. But
Yeah.
think about that. What if God's kingdom is one? I mean, look, we've got some beautiful images in the Bible. One day, all the weapons will be turned into implements of farming.
Man.
You're going to take implements of war and turn them into implements of farming. That means you're changing from death to life. Now look, let's face it, right now, there are enemies out there. So what does the Torah say about this? Deuteronomy 20. When you go out and it looks like there's going to be war, what do you do first? You offer peace. Right? I'm going to offer peace. Now, if they don't accept those grounds for peace, then war ensues and you have to do what you have to do. So people that are critical, like I hear people go, well, the modern state of Israel, I don't agree with everything. Look, I don't either. I'm a Zionist. But I don't agree with everything, but I do see the principles in place where they're seeking to build peaceful resolutions and they're met with warfare. Look, that's a fact. Read history. Now, does everything that the IDF or the government or the U.S. government or the Australian government? No, of course not. But individually and collectively, we ought to be working on those particular angles. And I see some comments about certain language and certain words and terms. There are a lot of things that different people are, as we say. I saw, let's see, who said, Ronald Lee. Hey, Ronald. Certain words do trigger some people, is the phrase that we use today. None of this is intended to trigger anything other than deep thought.
You might trigger them, but it was accidentally.
But it was accidentally. What we want to do, though, is we want to look at whether someone translates Eved as servant or slave. I know that certain people attach certain images. I'm
Sure.
talking biblical images. So I could use the word Eved, and, half people would know what that means, half not. But it does mean to serve another. In modern English, for quite some time now, that word slavery has been, that word's been attached to it. So that's the only point there.
In a sense, we're all slaves. Really.
Miriam just said, I have no problem with the term slave.
Well-
let's face it, you're going to be a slave to serve somebody or something.
Or somebody.
Choose this day who you will serve.
Look, Miriam just quoted Bob Dylan
Yeah.
and, let's see, Bob Dylan and God. So that's a good mixture.
I don't know
That's
if I
for
could
me and
use
my
those
house.
names interchangeably.
Bob
like
Dylan and
that.
God? Bob
Man.
Zimmerman?
Yeah.
No, but the idea though is, please don't misunderstand.
No.
We're using terms and phrases just to convey points that are probably over most of our heads. But what we want people to get from this is, let's all, me, Ross, and everyone else, let's take a step off the high horse and let's meet head on in a friendly discourse with people around us who say, what's your faith, John? You say, well, I seek to live my life according to God's commandments. And the response might be, you can't live by the commandments. And you can say, well, I can't live by all of them because all of them don't apply to me. But those that do, I seek to follow because they do, in many ways, convey to me my convictions, what God wants of me and every human. And, you can think of all these verses. What does God want from you? Ecclesiastes 12:13. The sum of the matter is, keep the commandments. Fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. There are some that don't apply to the modern day. There's some that don't apply to the diaspora. Some that don't apply to men. Some don't apply to women. Some don't apply to priests. What we can do, we ought to
I'd
do.
probably be stopping it. I'm working on it because I couldn't remember all that.
There you go.
What's that reference in Ecclesiastes?
12:13. Ecclesiastes 12:13. So keep the commandments, and feel free in discussion to tell people that it is the whole duty of man to live according to his ways, to walk according to the commandments as best we can. Here's the beauty. Though a righteous man falls 7 times, right? You can make mistakes. Now I also don't believe this idea you kind of pick up in life. We all sinned and fall short, and everybody, I sin every day. I don't know that I sin every day. I don't know that you sin every day. I mean, maybe I do, but not intentionally.
Right.
And so I think that if our focus is on how can I live out the commandments without, I don't have to walk around, look, let me do this. This is a good example. Like, I know the camera's not on me, but that's perfect. What if I walked into a public place like this?
The holy man's here.
Here I am.
Okay.
Here I am. Watch me following my footsteps. That's not the way we live our life. There's some. You ought to be thinking of ways. We ought to be thinking of ways. How can I make someone's life better without taking credit for it publicly.
Yeah.
Like if I know somebody needs something and I can get it to them and they don't know it came from me. Look,
Yeah.
I have people, I can't name
You might
names because
accidentally
they
do
get
some
this.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I've had people write me and say, Ross, don't tell anybody, but I saw on Facebook that so and so needed something. Could you write a check? Here's you the money for United Israel, and if you could write a check to this person,
Okay.
that way it doesn't come from me. Could you do that? I mean,
Oh,
we've
wow.
had that happen. It's a way. Now, look, I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but I'm just thinking. You know, in fact, sometimes I'm like, well, how do I know that you know that that person got the, you know, I don't necessarily want to be in the middle, but I'm just saying, how do we, you know, I know you
Because
guys.
they trust you.
But,
They
I
trust
mean,
United
25 years ago, somebody bought an anonymous. I still to this day don't know, have a clue who it was. A washer and dryer just showed up at my house from Sears or whatever.
Right.
They drove up, delivered. What's
Well,
the deal here?
I was.
No,
I
just
was.
keep your mouth closed. But,
yeah,
yeah, to this day.
yeah,
My point is,
Yeah.
to this day, I'm really not positive.
yeah,
So it just makes me wonder.
yeah,
It could have been
yeah,
John.
yeah,
I didn't know John at the time, but
right.
it could have been. So it kind of keeps me humble and
Yeah.
And it restores our faith in humanity
Yes.
too, but
Yeah.
it also, you're able, a person that receives a gift and we don't know where it came from, a lot of times we can go, man, I tell you what, I was really praying about that and somehow God worked the hearts of men, right? Because you give credit to God
Right.
that way.
and so it encourages you to go on. Golly, crazy stuff.
It's David Connolly said, pass it on.
Pass it on.
That's
a good
kind of the
one.
way it
It's a good
is.
one.
Pass it
Exactly.
forward, pass it on. We have opportunities, and you know, one example that I'll give is that I heard someone say one time, you might be the only Bible that someone ever reads, like through your actions. Like you don't have to go up and say, look, I'm here to help you because Jehovah my God commanded me to do this, and you know, because then they're like, well, are you doing it because you want to, or somebody told you had
Right.
to? You just go, hey, look, I heard you need this. Look, I got 2 of them. You can have one. Don't mention it. Psh, bye.
Right.
How do we do that? How do we turn people's lives around? It's a beautiful life that we live. We have an excellent opportunity. Think about this. What if God depends on us to fix the world? What if God is depending on you?
Might take a while.
It might, but it might not.
I'm gonna need another couple hundred years.
But
Hey.
what if everybody
But,
started working together?
Not to take away from your
I
point, but
see.
that's
I
a
see the
great point.
difference
Great point.
in our world just since my grandmother's days in the 1800s.
Yeah,
I see a difference. So it is possible that people can turn to God, learn His ways, and
Yeah.
walk in them.
there have always been good and bad. There have been good things and bad things, and good people, and quite honestly, people that don't act so well. But we've been tasked to do well, to do good, and that's one of our main tasks. I mean, now how do we do it? We have a wonderful book of instructions that gives us guidance on this. Torah means direction, guidance, instruction. So if we can read this, and sometimes where it seems very archaic or set in another world almost, you can say, well, I don't have an ox, but, you know, I see the point. Deeper, the principle involved here. And if you've done something wrong, we ought to make it right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to come off sounding like everything's happy and glad and all that good stuff, because what I mean to say here is that we're charged to affect people, to make a difference. Now, sometimes that's good or bad. I mean, in other words, we make people mad, sad, or glad. You know, you would think right off the bat that we're supposed to only make them happy and glad, but sometimes the truth makes them mad and sad. So just as long as you affect people and don't go through life being neutral,
Yeah.
I think it makes a big difference there.
Miriam says good deeds are contagious.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes
Sure.
that idea of passing it on, if something positive happens to you, you might say, man, it made me feel good. I'm going to do that for somebody else.
Every deed goes unpunished.
Well, there's always the negative. There's always, you know, a way to go, well, I'm not going to give to that
Yeah.
bum because he's going to do something bad. And
And plus,
some
I mean,
people have been hindered in their own spiritual growth because they assume the worst in people, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes.
You can, but if
Yeah.
you read that book enough, I don't know, it's like you can't help yourself.
Yeah,
You just can't help
yeah.
and we don't always see results in doing the right thing. Sometimes you're doing the right thing. You
Wonder if you're making a difference. Yeah.
Right.
Going to make a difference. I think
Could
you
I
always do.
ask for a prayer request
Yep.
from Mama before we leave?
Yeah.
My mother's 103. A lot of y'all probably know that, but she's going through some mental changes that are very challenging. I mean, she's had dementia for a while, but it's getting to the point where I'm really concerned for
Yeah.
her, and I don't know whether it's a change in her meds or it's just the fact that her mind is really going. But please pray for my mother, Catherine,
Yep.
that Jehovah would restore to her a sweet and peaceful attitude
Absolutely.
and not be fearful or angry or aggressive.
Yeah, I believe in prayer. We ought to keep one another in prayers, and so Sherry's asked for people to remember her mother, Catherine. So do that. Pray for her. Pray for those in need. And, you know, people feel free on our Facebook group page to, you know, send in, hey, keep my friend
Yeah.
or my loved one in prayer, because I think that's real important. So we've got a beautiful day outside today.
For about 2 minutes there, it was pretty good.
Yeah.
Especially if your name is Noah.
Yeah.
Look, now hold on. We wouldn't recognize the beauty of a clear sky if we didn't see gray
Yes.
skies, and
Boy,
vice
can we
versa.
recognize a good day around here.
Well, but also there are people who
Clear,
really need
clear.
rain, and
Rain.
we've got it.
Yeah.
So we're also thankful that our plants are getting water right now,
Yes.
and so we've got plenty to be happy for. Look, next week. At the present, my mind is drawing me towards a class on sin. You can tell them your Hebrew preacher friend is going to be talking about sin next week. So have a beautiful week. Shavua Tov, and we'll see you next week. Don't miss it.